to our career skills webinar for our month. Today, we've got two really exceptional proposal industry experts with us, Sean Stewart and Roxanne Marquez, both of whom have experience in the architecture, engineering, and construction industry, as well as a lot of other professional domains. And so without any further ado, well, actually, here, let me give you a little housekeeping. If you've got comments, questions, words of wisdom, drop them in the chat. I'll be monitoring them throughout the presentation, and we may bring some of those questions forward as the presentation continues. So don't be shy. This is for you to learn and for our presenters to be able to provide that customized expertise for you. So add your questions there in the chat box. And if you will be receiving a recording of this after the presentation is complete. That email will go out tomorrow. So just a couple housekeeping items. Without further ado, Sean and Roxy, we would love to learn a little bit about who you are, and let's get started on our storytelling with data journey.
Great. Well, Sean, why don't you go ahead and start?
Sure. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Sean. I'm currently marketing manager at Ghirardelli Associates in California. I've been in the architectural, engineering, construction industry doing proposals and marketing for about 15 to 17 years, something like that. Before that, I did some service marketing. I have an education in actually psychology. I went to school to be a therapist, then did an internship and realized I didn't want to be a therapist. So I went into marketing instead. And now I do therapy for engineers. But basically what I do is my background after my undergrad, I went back for grad school in consumer psychology. So I focus on things that influence people's decisions when they buy things. So that's what I do, based in SoCal, and always available to talk to people about consumer psychology.
Great. My name's Roxanne Marquez. You'll also see me online as Roxy. Either is good. I'm the marketing manager with an architecture firm in Emeryville, California called Siegel and Strain Architect. And it's great to work with other visual design-minded people that share a lot of the same priorities and values when it comes to sustainability and recycling and long-term design. So great group here. Love what we do. Love being able to contribute, especially as a designer. I've been in AEC marketing for about 8 years. I think I'm coming up on my 8-year anniversary. And I started off as a marketing assistant and worked my way up through the corporate ladder. And what I really love about contributing to the AEC industry is bringing my background from my previous life in design disciplines and event management and production. I was in the wedding industry for about 5 or 6 years. Actually higher stress than the AEC industry all put together. But I come from a background with a degree in fashion design and a degree in visual communications. So I feel like I'm in here with the right crowd and happy to sort of help coach the PI community.
Thanks, Roxy. So today we're going to talk about how to tell a story with your data. Now, a lot of times, especially those of us in the AEC industry or anything highly technical, you work with your subject matter experts and they just inundate you with data. And it's like, okay, so what do I do with this? And so part of what we want to talk about is, 5 main areas, assuming that's funny. My thing's not moving forward. All right, give me one moment. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a couple of main things. Number one is when we're trying to convey information and make it like a story, number one is we want to talk about how to understand the context. Why are we doing this, and understand the key audience. Then we're going to talk about the different types of visual aids that you can use and when they're the most appropriate, how you can eliminate clutter, and how you can also focus attention. And then also we're going to talk about the importance of telling a story and a little bit of how to structure your message like a story. But first, I want to do a little activity. This may sound a little odd, but trust me, we're going to be going back to this later. So what we're going to do, there's a list of 10 words. We're going to memorize these words, this list, in less than a minute or 2 minutes. So there's a little trick to this. So I want everyone to follow along. So you look at the words, and each one's numbered, right? So here's what I want you to do. Look at number 1. So let's think of a word that rhymes with one. Okay, so gun. Okay, so think of a pen. So what you want to do, imagine a pen being shot out of a gun or something along those lines, something with the word that rhymes with one, so gun and a pen. Okay, now two, blue, computer. Imagine a picture in your head, a blue computer. Now hold that image in your head for a few seconds. Blue computer. Next, three, tree. Tree rhymes with three, so let's imagine a chair stuck in a tree. So picture the chair. See, look, just see that image in your head. A chair in a tree. Four, floor. Imagine a big old rock sitting on the floor. Right? So picture that in your mind. Five, beehive. Okay, so imagine a beehive with a hat on it. So picture that. Now, six, sticks. Imagine a door made out of sticks. So picture a door made out of sticks. Seven, heaven. Let's imagine like the little a bottle with the little wings and the halo, flying up to the pearly gates. Imagine that image. Seven, heaven, bottle flying up to heaven. Eight, think of gate, a gate made of paper. So imagine a gate made out of paper. Nine, line. Okay, imagine a bunch of tables in a line. Okay, now 10, hen, like a chicken. Imagine a hen sitting on a pillow. Okay, now this may sound kind of weird, but this does actually, I promise you, relate to what we're talking about. So we're going to come back to this a little bit later when we talk about memory. But first thing we want to talk about is understanding context. So before pulling any existing information or even starting a Word or PowerPoint document, I mean, how many times have you heard that? Oh, we have to do a proposal. Let's use the last one. No, we don't do that. Because what you really need to do is you got to understand your audience and the context and know what you're trying to do. And so you need to understand a little bit about why you're doing what you're doing. And so you need to understand, and to do that, you got to look at who's your audience. What are you trying to get them to do and what information will help and how are you going to present that information to best convey your message?
I think it's important to follow up if we're looking at all of the parts of a typical story, the who, what, when, where, and why. The why is actually the most important. So these three, the who, what, and how, are kind of the bones of your story, but that context is going to give you the why. And that's important because you have to make, the whole point of a story is to connect with your audience, and the why is what gets you there.
Yeah, so I don't know if anyone here has kids and they're always going, why? But why?
Mm-hmm.
Why?
But why?
You kind of need to be like that. And part of understanding your context is understanding the strengths and drawbacks of a presentation versus a written document. For example, when you do a presentation, you have a lot of control over what your audience sees and hears, and you can impact what they remember a little bit more. But you're not going to be able to provide a lot of detail unless you want to put them to sleep. However, a document, like a written document, you can provide a lot of detail, but you're not going to have as much control. So part of the key is understanding what do you need more, detail or control over what they see and remember. So it's really critical to remember those facts. And then you always have to ask, so what? And this is something I like to do in every proposal. Everything that I always, any type of document I do, is I try to distill my main message into a 3-minute story. It's almost like the executive summary. You can actually use that in what you're doing. But then you distill it further into the big idea, like a tweet. So think executive summary, tweet. Even if you don't use them and write them out in the presentation or document, knowing them and being able to just say it without hesitation helps you craft your message better.
I will just say too, Sean, for the so what, because this is one of the first principles that I learned in AEC marketing in general. I had my mentor explain it to me. I kind of visualize it as like, you know, we're here in Sacramento as a gold miner. You've got all of this dirt and rock and earth. And every time you say so what, it's like passing it through a sieve or a filter to kind of weed out the unnecessary info until you get those information gold nuggets. So if you think of it like every time you ask, so what of your topic, it's filtering it down into the essential point that you want to make, which is the why and helps to create your context. So this is super important when deciding what the point of your story is.
Exactly. And, you know, so one of the first steps, you know, before thinking about even considering opening PowerPoint or a document, you really want to plan each page and main section by storyboarding a document.
And I will interject to say that storyboarding is essential and oh so simple. We do run into a lot of situations. I know Sean and I both have been in that seat where they say, oh, just recycle the last interview presentation, just recycle the last one. But it's not meant for that audience. It's meant for this audience. So storyboarding is a simple and effective way to just get everyone in the same room, on the same page, literally, and start crafting a message specific to this audience. And what I like too is, you know, being in this virtual world, especially as we've learned during COVID, this used to take place in a boardroom with a dry erase marker board or something like that. But there's a lot of different ways that you can share storyboarding ideas virtually, whether it's, you know, an outline, a smart art in a Word document, or if you have something like a whiteboard or Miro, those are also shareable. But however you can decide to get your team in the room, putting ideas into an outline or a timeline, the storyboarding is essential before you craft anything.
Exactly. And then as you're storyboarding, you want to think about some of the visual aids that you're going to use. And there are a lot of different kind of visual aids that you can use to present data. But the type you select should really depend on the data and what your audience wants to do with the information. So there's, you know, 4 main kinds of visual aids that you can use. One is text. It's conveys a lot of information. You can modify things here and there to call things out. You have table, which is basically text arranged in a certain way to make it easy to look at. You have graphs, and that could be bar graphs. Sorry, I can't talk today. Coffee hasn't kicked in. Line graphs, things like that, scatter plots. And you have area graphs, which are, you know, pie graphs. So the first thing is text. So what's the first thing everyone noticed? 99%. 99% of people will notice a large number above. You know, so you can convey a lot of information, but it's not that great in a presentation. So you really want to do something to draw out the key information to make sure that they see it.
All right. Sorry, can we go back, Sean? Because I just did want to also add that this 99%, whether you're doing it in a presentation or in a graphic and a proposal, doesn't matter if it's on screen or on paper. Something in graphic design we call an entry point. And it's usually the red dot on a white field. It's just kind of like the example you're seeing here. It's whatever is going to attract the eye's attention to the information you want to convey, which explains in a more scientific sense, your eye is naturally inclined to do this, why 99% of people will notice giant red text on a white field. So that's just one graphic design principle that we use a lot. And you've probably seen it without even recognizing what it is, but look up entry points or focal points is another key element in graphic design that Sean's illustrated here.
Yeah, awesome, thank you. And then, you know, then we have tables, and they're great for documents, but they're not the best idea in a presentation. I mean, it can work, but you got to be careful. But there's things you can do like minimizing borders to stand out more, or even further applying a little bit of what Roxy was discussing earlier, where you see on the right, you have a heat map. So all you're doing is changing the colors, darkening, lightening them based on the higher or lower number. Now, looking at some of the other visual aids, you got graphs. Now, there are a couple different kinds of graphs. You have scatter plots, which are good at showing the relationship between two variables. You have a slope diagram, which shows usually one or two variables. I wouldn't include more than three, but it compares at 2 time points. So time 1 times 2, or year 1, year 2. You also have line graphs, and you can have single or multiple variables on the line graph, but it shows continuous data. And then bar graphs. Bar graphs are everywhere. And so because of that, they're easy to understand, and people tend to intuitively understand what you're doing. But I'm going to talk a little bit about each one. The first thing is the scatter plots. So scatter plots show the relationship between two variables. And in some cases, there's things you really want to look at is, number one, clearly state the most important information. What is this graph telling you? Call that out. Indicate a trend line if there is a trend line. And then make sure that you can pick out the individual data points. Sometimes if it's like this, it'll look like this blob, and you don't really get what you're looking at. Now, line graphs. Line graphs, as mentioned, they illustrate continuous data and can also show multiple series of data. So it's called like a single series. We have one variable. You have multiple series where you can compare two variables or more over time. And then range and average, where you give an average and a high and a low. So those are different options available. But you want to be careful about how much data you show on the line graph. This was one line graph I was given, and I heavily modified it because they had like the legend on the side, and so each, like this dotted line meant this color line meant this line, and each line had like its own legend, and it wasn't labeled. It was just, you had to keep looking back and forth. I personally would not include any more information on a line graph. This was not a presentation. This was actually for a document, but I cut it back a lot because this is something that we're going to study and understand. But still, there's things you can do to clean it up. And so I like, if possible, I'll put, the labels right on the graph, so you're not looking all over. And then slope graphs. Slope graphs show differences between two time periods or points of comparison. These are really simple to do, but I would not do more than 3. It gets really chaotic if you do. And then bar charts. Bar charts are ubiquitous. They compare multiple categories or variables, and they're easy to understand because everyone uses them. But there's a couple things you want to do. Number one is minimize unnecessary information. And if possible, add the values from the y-axis. So you can see the numbers up there, like 5,000, 7,000. Actually label it so you're not tracing across. And make sure you use the right scale on the y-axis.
Yeah, actually have seen several examples, especially in recent elections, of bar charts that don't have an accurate scale to either the X or Y axis, and it can actually convey misinformation. So it should be balanced and accurate so that your information is correct. Otherwise, you can make sweeping assumptions that, aren't really accurate.
Yeah. One key that I always looked at is if you look at the bottom should start at 0. If it doesn't, they should have 2 lines to indicate that. But if you shorten the distance between the categories, sometimes it'll make things look way farther apart, kind of like what Roxy's saying. It's very true. You got to be very careful with those. Now, there are some things to avoid. Graphs can be affected, but there are some things that you really probably shouldn't include. And unfortunately, we see these a lot. Number one is pie charts. I'm not a fan of pie charts. I like pie, but not pie charts. So, Catherine, no offense, nothing about pie, just saying, but the chart. The reason why is, have you ever seen a pie chart with like 20 or something different categories? And like some of the categories are like a line, you can't even tell. That's why. If you're only showing like 2 or 3 variables, then it's great. But if it's showing a lot, it's probably not the best thing to use. Anything 3D. Just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Right.
So the problem with that is when you're using charts, you're using spatial differences or spatial locations to show differences between things. And 3D charts actually throw that off, that scale off. So it's hard to really judge how big. So it can actually skew your data. And then bullets. Bullet points kill presentations. Documents are great, but presentations, unless you're summarizing maybe 3 points, that's it. I wouldn't do more than that.
A couple of things I will follow up to Sean's point, especially for 3D charts. Design aesthetically, it's a thing of the past. It's, from the 90s. Don't use it. But the other thing that happens with 3D elements is that you start to get that bevel that comes behind some of your bars and your information, which actually eats up the precious negative space that you need to convey the spatial relationships in your charts. So you're kind of filling in the space that you need with something unnecessary in a weird sense. But if you were to see a side by side, it'd make more sense. The negative space actually helps you to communicate your relationships between your data, like in some of the bar charts that Sean showed as examples. If it's 3D, it takes up that space and you need it for other things. Bullet points, again, kind of thing of the 90s, 2000s, we're past that. It's nothing that you can't create with proper typography and spacing. Your line spacing can just as easily help you to list out information without bullet points.
Yes. And I'm glad you mentioned the design aesthetics. I used to always tell people that, the 90s called, they want their PowerPoint back.
All the time.
Yeah.
All
Like,
the time.
no, you don't need that. Yeah, and kind of going to kind of building off of what Roxy just mentioned is, you want to eliminate clutter. So as Roxy mentioned, when you use 3D graphics, that bevel can actually take up space because every word, image, graphic placed on a page or presentation places a load on your brain. I mean, it takes up space. Your brain has to process it and say, oh no, ignore that, focus on this. And so it can actually take away from your message. And so there's a couple things that you want to understand, and they're very similar. It's signal to noise ratio and data to ink ratio. So basically, the signal is our message, and the noise is everything that doesn't convey that message. Data to ink, similar. It's the larger the share of a graphic's ink is devoted to data, the better. So if it's not conveying your message, get rid of it. And some of the ways that we can help you eliminate clutter is through the Gestalt principles of visual perception. It's a theory in psychology that talks about how the brain interprets visual information. And you can actually use that to present data in a way that reduces clutter and gets rid of things that you don't need. And there's 4 main principles that I want to talk about. You have proximity, which, objects placed together are perceived as belonging together. Similarity, objects that are similar, like in this example, the colors are perceived as being together. Enclosure, objects that are enclosed together are perceived as being together, like belonging. And closure, you have the dots arranged in a circle, so you perceive a circle. And you can use that a lot in different ways. For example, tables are a really good example of this. Placing data close together, the data appears as rows and columns. You don't need lines necessarily.
This is another example where the negative space effectively acts as your lines. Your mind, because of the Gestalt principle, is going to see it the same way.
Exactly. And also too, like the color. This is similar. This is an example of similarity. Blue and gray. They alternate. Now I can see, oh, they're separate rows. You also have enclosure. So if you're trying to focus on one area, you can put that in a closure, like a shaded area or something like that. And that makes it, oh yeah, that's the forecast from there on. Okay. And so it makes it appear to stick together. And then closure. So here's where I use this a lot. A lot of times when you do a table in Excel or Word, it creates a box around it. I always get rid of the extra 2 lines. I keep the y-axis, the x-axis, and that's it. Because of closure. You know, you have that line, those two lines, you kind of perceive a square. And so you don't need that extra information. And here's an example of before and after. So this was what I was given, and this is what it looked like the second time. So again, you take out a lot of the lines, the extra lines. You make sure that the important things is big, and you also look at the outline of each individual data point so you can see them.
And one instance here I want to call attention to is about reducing fatigue in the audience. Sean has in his description, which is very accurate. Your mind and your eye can really only absorb so much in the few precious seconds you have looking at something like this. So what I've done in the past is apply the squint test. I was explaining this to Sean, that if I was given the image on the left, I would kind of stand back or sort of sit away from my screen and squint and see what jumps out at you first, and then what kind of fades to the background. And that will help you to determine what visual information you can eliminate, get rid of the waste. So that explains why he's removed the lines and why he's removed the additional enclosure lines, because the squint test will kind of prove to you that you don't really need that. The focus is just on the information and the axes for data.
Yeah, so if you guys forget everything else about this presentation, just remember what Roxy just said, because a lot of that background, this is the why, but the squint test, that's what will help you determine what to focus on. If you don't remember anything, just remember the squint test. That will help you a lot. I love that principle when she's telling me about it. And now you've gotten rid, you know what you want to communicate, you've gotten rid of the clutter. Now you need to focus your attention. And again, you got to understand how people perceive visual information. And to do that, it helps to talk about the different types of memory. So you have iconic memory. It's fast, it's unconscious, it's what draws your attention. Your brain is aware of it before you're even consciously aware of it. Then you have short-term memory. Short-term memory is limited. It averages about 4 to 7 pieces of information, and you either lose it or encodes to long-term memory. This is why we say when you're providing bullet points or any type of information, 3 to 5 pieces of information at the most, because most people won't remember more than that. And then you have long-term. Long-term memory is actually a combination of visual, verbal, and contextual information. It uses several separate structures of the brain. So you can't just rely on one type of presentation, either auditory or verbal or visual. You want to combine them if at all possible. So real quick, how many 3s are on this page? 4, right? Pretty easy. All right. How many number 1s? Takes a little longer, huh? And so that is, that's your iconic memory. That, that ties into what we call pre-attentive attributes. The orange of the 3, it was different, so it stood out. That's what we call a pre-attentive attribute. And so it's a visual cue that unconsciously draw your attention and can be used to highlight information. And you use that by changing elements of your documents or presentation to draw attention. For example, text, change the text color or size or anything like that. And I think, Roxanne, this would also apply to the focal point, right? That you're mentioning?
Yes, definitely in the focal point sense, because our mind is trained to look for contrast first. There's a reason that a stop sign is red, because you need to focus attention on it. And so that similar principle can be applied to text. You should be intentional in the call outs that you want to do in certain lines of text like this. And it also lends to not only getting to the attention to the information more quickly, but also sometimes helps with, certain ADA or neurodiverse issues. Maybe you have someone who English is their second language, or maybe they're still getting over dyslexia or any other kind of visual setback or impairment, that highlighting especially numbers or certain words or symbols is going to still convey the message, but make it a little bit easier for someone who struggles more.
Yeah. And that's a really good point. I wasn't planning on mentioning this, but about people who may perceive things differently or neurodiverse. One challenge and one thing I always get asked is, what if someone's colorblind? And so one thing that I've done, there's actually, if you go to like the Google Play Store or the Apple Store, there's apps that you can put on your phone that will show you what someone that's colorblind, how they will see that image. And so sometimes what I'll do is especially if it's something I know that maybe the client, they may be colorblind, or just in general, when I'm developing the overall graphics and branding and colors, that's something I always do, is you always check to see if someone was colorblind, would they be able to make this out?
Yeah, I think there's also testing sites for your website as well. So depending on how you want to publish something, just keeping those basic graphic design principles in mind will help you reach and communicate with a broader audience, just by making a few tweaks.
Yeah, real quick here, I did put one of those accessible website services in the chat if anybody's interested.
Great. Yeah.
Awesome.
I know they're out there.
Okay, so talking about these principles, you can, the pre-attentive attributes, you can use these to focus attention on specific parts of a graph. For example, the blue bar, okay, that's what you want to focus on. So you change the color. A couple other things, I forgot to mention earlier, when I do graphs, or bar graphs especially, one thing I will often do is, when you use Excel or Word to create these, sometimes the spacing between the bars is really big, and it actually makes it harder to read. So what I'll often do is make the bars 150% size, or the gap, make it 50% smaller. And that will make the gaps 50% the size of the bars. And so it makes it easier to read. So that's one thing I do to help readability. But the other thing too, in this case, it wouldn't work because it's by year. But if it wasn't by year, if it was just categories that weren't really sequential, I would actually go from largest at the bottom to highest at the top. That way your eye just kind of follows down, and you can see, oh, this is where the top is. Just, it makes it look cleaner and it's easier to understand.
I think a graph like this is an excellent example of kind of the whole point of creating a graph. As I've taught in previous sessions for infographics, you want to make your point irrefutable. It should be extremely obvious. In here, the way that he has this set up, the result that I'm looking for, or that I should be looking for, is plain as day, because the colors are different. It's all about more data. Spatially, the axes are all well balanced. There's enough negative space. Whatever conclusion, and I don't even really know what we're talking about, but I can see the conclusion clear as day. And that should be the goal. That should be the end game of all of these principles that we've been discussing, because if your conclusion cannot be clearly identified, then you haven't done your job as a designer of visual data. And so might have to go back to the drawing board. And sometimes as a QA or QC measurement, give it to someone who doesn't know what any of this is about, and ask them read it back to you, evaluate it and give you the conclusion that they're drawing. Because if different than what you have in mind, you might have some more work to do.
Exactly. Now, the other thing we talk about is our pictures and icons, and this is more about long-term memory. So long-term memory is based, remember, both on visual and verbal information. So using both types of information will help your audience remember your message a lot better.
And when we were discussing this, I thought this was hand in hand with what I've taught, is that pictures and icons, you've actually been practicing and learning them since you were a toddler, especially in our, kindergarten-based culture. We start learning to communicate by understanding shapes, colors, basic nouns like apple, dog, cat, tree, that kind of thing. We've actually been training to identify icons since we were little, and many languages are based on, pictography, like Chinese, Egyptian, anything, hieroglyphs, anything that you can see that a picture has developed into a word. So this is part of our, just humanities, and this is part of our training and learning. And that's why tapping into that base training creates a communication that lives in long-term memory, like Sean explained. So pictures and icons are effective as long as they're not overdone. We're not trying to create a new language here. We're just trying to create a point. So that is one thing to remember.
Yeah. And speaking of that, remember, let's go back. Remember the first list of words, right? At the beginning. So, and hopefully people can get their, oops, let me go back. That did not work. Hopefully people can go off mute. So I want to hear people answer. What was the first word on that list that we had?
Yeah, so we can't go off mute, but folks can drop it in the chat.
Okay, drop it in the chat. Yeah. Okay, so let me see the chat. Okay, so yeah, pen, got it. Yeah, you guys got it. Okay, so number 2, what's number 2? Computer, good. Yeah, Kristen was fast on that one. Okay, you know what? Let's shake it up a bit. What's 7? Number 7 on the list. Bottle.
Oh.
Okay. 4. Rock. Yes. See? So, and that's the thing. You can memorize it forward, backwards, whatever sequence it was in. And the reason why you can do that is because of taking the verbal information, imagining it in a visual picture. And so basically you combine the visual with the verbal, and it sticks to, someone's accusing people of screenshots. It all, sticks into, long-term memory. This is kind of a neat, little trick. I use this all the time. Actually, if I have to go to the grocery store and I don't have pen and paper for a list. That's how I make sure I remember everything. But there are, but it just shows, it's a good example to show that this is how you remember things. Even people who it's actually like competitive memorization. People actually memorize pages of random numbers. And the way they do it is they'll take the number and whatever it rhymes with, the numbers rhyme with, they'll picture that in their head. And so they almost like create a story off of that image, those images. And then that's how they're able to remember it back. So combining the verbal and the visual is what really gets your message to stick.
It's probably why we start off learning nursery rhymes in school.
Yeah, rhyming, yeah, it just sticks. There you go. All right, there we go. Okay, so now we want to talk about telling a story. You have all this data, it's organized, clutter's gone, but you got to give it that meaning. And most purchasing decisions, I don't care if it's buying something totally just commoditized, what it is, it's a proposal, you have a strict, ranking. Those rankings are still influenced by emotions. And most purchasing decisions are influenced by emotion. That's why telling a story is so persuasive, because it makes your data combined with an emotion.
And this is where the so what is so important.
Yes, exactly. And this is kind of a little bit why. The so oxytocin, neurotransmitter, they actually play a huge role in perceptions of trust. And it's interesting because there's a lot of research out there on the role of oxytocin in trust in sales environments. And so they actually had these experiments where they gave people, it's like this oxytocin nasal spray, and then they watched ads. Then they had some that didn't watch ads. And the ones that had the higher levels of oxytocin actually trusted the sales ad or the sales message more than those who hadn't, and were more likely to say, yeah, I'd buy that product. So that's one part. But how do we, increase oxytocin levels? It's not like you can go to a presentation, go, here, let me squirt this in your nose real quick, but probably not going to go well. So there's other things you can do. Another study found that storytelling will increase oxytocin levels. One study in particular, I remember there were children in the hospital. They measured their oxytocin levels. Then they listened to a story. So they had a storyteller come in, told a story. Afterwards, they checked the oxytocin levels again, and they were elevated. So telling a story is critical. That's why when we say case studies or like project descriptions, you always make it like a story, because that's what gets that emotional attachment and builds trust in what you're trying to say.
Sean, this is the best explanation to why I binge shows on Hulu and Netflix, and probably why my grandmother was addicted to soap operas for 40 years, because gotta have that story.
Yeah, it's what makes you feel good, and you get it, it's kind of almost addicting, and you want more. So yeah, that is totally how it works. But it's kind of hard, but there's a few ways you can make things a story. Number one is, instead of, and I get this all the time. I'm sure, Roxanne, I'm sure you see this all the time, and anyone in the AEC engineering industry gets this. You ask for a project description, and they give you like this big old long list of specifications, like 8-inch pipeline, this, that. So what? Like what you said. So who cares?
Yeah.
Well, that 8-inch pipeline carried water to a community that had a problem with water quality and couldn't drink the tap water. Now they can. Something like that. So you have to understand the context, go into the beginning. What is the problem? What was solved? Introduce a problem that was solved by that project. What was the outcome? So you talk about, here's the setting, here's the issue, the human element. Then you talk about the middle. You provide data and examples that demonstrate the problem and introduce solutions and benefits. So you almost in the middle say, now, so it's not like we did this. It's like, no, hey, in this community, here's the issue. So the city was doing this project to solve it and improve the lives of the people by XYZ. So when we went in, we did this. And then we talk about, here's what we did, but here's some of the challenges we had, and here's how we overcame them. That's the middle. And then the end. Okay, now with this project done, the city is able to do this for the community. Here's the clear message. What's the clear call to action? Hey, we can do the same for you. So you want to end with, here's what happened, and this is what we want you to do with this information. So that's kind of how you arrange your story, how you arrange even your total message, your whole entire proposal, your scope, everything. Here's the issue. Here's, okay, here's how we're going to do it. And here's the solutions. And here's what we want you to do. Give us a chance. Here, we can do this for you if you work with us. And that's how you create the story.
I have also actually, Sean, seen this as format requirements in RFPs as of recent. I think that a lot of the reviewing agencies are kind of getting tired of the long data facts, and they want to hear a story. I've seen requests for problem solving and solutions based, narratives for project descriptions in RFPs as of like this past year. So they are taking note.
Yeah, and one thing I would like to add on that, and I get this all the time, it's, I have to work a lot with Caltrans, unfortunately. Anyone who knows or done Caltrans proposals knows. But the thing is, it's kind of hard to do that. You have to do an SF330 on it. So it's kind of hard. Like, well, how do you create this? You still can. It's just, you got to be a little more creative. You got to think, here's the requirements. How do I fit, this structure in these requirements the best that I can? It may not be perfect, but even if you do it just partially, it's better than none at all. So it's not an all or nothing thing. So that's one thing to remember. Sometimes you're going to have to be flexible, and you're not going to be able to do it all the time, but you can do more than you realize in a lot of cases. So if you forget everything, just remember what Roxy said about the squint test. That was great. I wish I should have put that on here. Just put squint test. That helps a lot. But remember, you got to understand your audience and why you're presenting. You got to understand the so what and the why. You have to use the appropriate visual aids to communicate your message. Know what to use and when. Eliminate the things that don't support your message and focus attention. Remember the squint test. And tell a compelling story with a very clear call to action. And with that, Roxy, you have anything else to add? Any questions? We bored you guys to death. Sorry, I'm sorry, right? Anything else?
No, I think just coming full circle, designing with the end in mind. Sometimes that has helped me in the past to work backwards, decide what I want my client or my reviewer to do or to decide, and then create a table or graph from there. It might seem a little wonky and backwards, but it's all about, you know, sort of guiding your viewer or reviewer along the path to the place that you want them to be, which is giving you projects and contracts. So
Yeah.
it's kind of the overall big picture of why this is all so important and necessary.
Yeah. No, and yeah, that totally makes sense because it's like, you know, a lot of times I'll say, oh, we got to put a graphic in here. It's like, why? What do you want? You know, and starting at the end, like you say, helps define that and determine, no, this is what we're doing.
I mean, everything that I do design-wise is approached with the, you know, the KISS method. Keep it super simple. People like simple.
All right.
Well, I don't see any questions here in the comments. If there are a couple more that would like to filter through, we've just been seeing some really positive feedback here about how this is helping folks up-level their presentation styles and their graphic design abilities. So thank you so much for everybody who's joining. Liz says that she's going to be squinting at all of her data from now on. So thank you very much for that, Liz. Thank you, Paul. Christy does have a real quick question here on advice for storyboarding. So Christy, do you have a little bit more context for that? Like, can you drop in a little bit more information about exactly what you're, or actually here, Christy, I think I can allow you to talk. Let's see, did it go?
I have not done storyboarding before. Can y'all hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
I have never done storyboarding before. I do have enough of a graphics background to be dangerous, and I have a graphics department to support me. And I have a template that we have used for a proactive proposal that I can pretty much choose slides from and put things together with. But do you have any advice for like tools, how to get started with it? I see somebody is posting a storyboarding resource. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I will say for
address that.
storyboarding, the nice thing about storyboarding is that you don't need any real graphic design expertise. Storyboarding is all about crafting, you know, the skeleton, as it were, of your message. So taking what Sean has explained about where's your beginning, middle, and end, what's your supporting data points, what's the conclusion that you want your viewer or your reviewer to get out of your message. That can all be done in an outline. I've even gone so far as to do like open up a Word document and just drop in a smart chart. There's already like templates preloaded where all you have to do is type in the info. If you have an in-house graphics team, it's important to convey a couple of things, like the actual outline of your information and maybe a couple of ideas for layout. Like if you have a supporting image, where do you want that to go? If you have certain words that you want bolded, like in the examples that Sean gave, what do you want those to be? But it's really just kind of doing the backbone of your message. And I think let your graphic experts or people with more experience add the sheen and the bells and whistles. The what is more important in a storyboard as opposed to, you know, the nice polished result.
Yeah. Yeah, to add to that, I always look at the storyboard as a living document. Like I'll go back and change stuff. The way I tend to approach it, I'll do like I have a table, I'll do like, okay, section 1, this is what needs to be there. What is the evaluation criteria being met? And I just kind of go across that way. With that, I usually just hand write it in paper. Like I get paper and draw a square, text here, graph here, this graph will be this, and I just write a note. And then I literally just go, okay, I'm probably going to need a couple pages here, so this is where I go. It is for me drawing it out. I've done also on Word and other things, but for me drawing it, like just literally drawing a box and writing this goes here, kind of helps me remember it. So when I'm developing it, I kind of already know what I'm gonna put where. Like for some reason, it just helps me remember what I was thinking of. But yeah, it can be really simple. But I usually start outline. Okay, now go, and then I change it.
Mhm.
So don't
It-
feel bad if your final product doesn't look like your first version of your storyboard. Don't worry, you didn't storyboard wrong at all.
mhm.
Don't. It's not like, oh, it has to be set in stone. It's here's an idea. Oh, I'll tweak this. I'll move this, and it's just to get you to organize your thoughts to get you going.
And in fact, the storyboard is the part of the process where it's messy, where you make your mistakes, where you kind of track and reiterate things, because it kind of comes back to that carpenter's rule. You measure twice and cut once. So if you work out all of the kinks and tweaks and refine the message throughout the storyboarding phase, by the time you actually get to publish a graph or a table or an infograph, you've already got 2/3 of the work done. Making edits to some of these graphs, even some of the more basic examples that Sean has showed us here, is very time consuming and can run into your deadline and can jeopardize your deliverable. So storyboarding out parts of your proposal, including the graphs and charts, actually ends up saving time, because you don't want to make your changes and mistakes last minute on a final product.
Excellent answer to a complicated question, and something we might have to dive into in the future. So Christy and other guests here, please stay tuned, because that might be something that we're able to tackle in the upcoming year.
There might be a part 2 coming.
There, we could only hope. We'd love to have you all back, that's for sure. So I don't see any other questions. And of course, if y'all do have further questions about storyboarding, one of the great, they're not a formal partner of ours, but we do really love KSI as far as like instructions about how to do really good proposal tasks and individual tactics and strategies. That blog is unparalleled, in my opinion, as far as being able to deliver some of those really good educational insights. So go over there, check them out, see what they have going on. I don't see any additional questions here, so we're happy to give folks a little bit of time back in their day. If you have enjoyed this presentation, we're always happy to see you in the PI community to discuss what you've learned, what's going on in your proposal life, and answer further questions. So please continue the conversation at proposalindustryexperts.com.